She went down to the river, and into the river she dived. She went down to the river at night. Is a dream a lie if it don't come true? Or is it something worse? Leda loved swans. As a girl, she would seek them out. The royal gardeners knew if they wanted to keep their favorite little princess happy, they would build a pond or a lake into the garden, and she would come down and feed them and watch them for hours gliding gracefully across the water. Now, as a woman, a new wife, and thus newly made queen of Sparta, she had been delighted to find a flock that gathered every evening by a nearby riverside where she could go and bathe and swim and see her precious swans. Then Darius, her husband and her king, had made it clear he was proud of his wise and exquisitely beautiful wife, but he would not be pleased with her until she gave him an heir. And until then, her position would not be secure. Well, she did her duty in that regard, of course, but there was less passion and none of the thrill that Leda had been led to believe there would be in such actions. So she had responsibilities and pressures that made her restless. Today she was particularly restless. It had seemed like someone or something was watching her all the time. She couldn't see them, but they wanted something from her. She could barely wait until Apollo's sun had started descending toward the horizon before she rushed down to the riverside to see her swans and take a swim. She went down to the river, down to the river she'd ride. And as she got there he was. She had just removed her clothing to swim when she saw the largest swan she had ever seen. He was gliding almost a ballet back and forth across the water, his dark webbed feet and ebony beak stunning against the perfect snowy whiteness of his feathers, his sinewy neck, his movements. She was mesmerized. His eyes, with a strange intelligence. Zeus! But before she could recognize a longing she would never name, an eagle cried in the sky and began to hurtle down towards that large swan, talons extended. The swan started and with his huge, powerful wings flew towards Leda. Acting on instinct alone, she reached out and brought him to her breast protectively. The poet says the dark webs caressed her thighs. The poet says her vague fingers could never have pushed away his feathered glory. And then the poet asks, did she put on his knowledge with his power in that moment? Perhaps her brain and body were shaken by the god's power and knowledge. She went home and found Darius and brought him to her bed. And a new passion and thrill filled the royal bed that night and after that. And Pandarius was pleased, especially when she began to grow round with her pregnancy and huge, so enormous, in fact, that twins were expected. The midwife was called, oh, my lady, so large, and yet every night you still swim in the river. It'll be ducks you'll be birthing, my lady. The dark shadow crossed the Queen of Sparta's face. No, not ducks. When her hour came, the midwife gathered all her ladies together. And in the midst of Leda's travails, the midwife called out, push. And the roundness was crowning when there was a gasp from the midwife, and she cleared the room of all the women except for the Queen of Sparta's oldest nurse, brought to her from childhood. And as Leda gave birth to 2 huge eggs, the nurse cried out, "What dark magic is this?" And the midwife said, "Hush, it is all as the gods will." And Leda, strong and powerful from her child bed, reached down and lifted each of her children in turn to name them. From the first egg, 2 tiny babies. First, the golden-haired Castor, feisty and smiling. And in the egg with him, the beautiful and powerful Clytemnestra. Oh, 2 children, so beautiful, so perfect as any who had ever been in the land of Sparta. Until, that is, the second egg hatched in a bright divine light. And Leda reached down for the dark-haired boy, Pollux, who with his first breath reached into his mother's lap and lifted his brother. And so Castor and Pollux were entwined for all of Castor's mortal life, and perhaps beyond. And then her second daughter, Leda picked up the tiny, perfect baby as the light dissipated. Already perfect ringlets framed a face too strong of feature for an infant, and yet stunning nonetheless. Oh, she smelled of honeysuckle and new-mown hay. No mewling or puking or making cross, wrinkly faces for this beautiful child. The shadow of the gods' power and knowledge came one last time to Leda. She saw the wall fall, the tower and the roof burn, and Agamemnon dead. Then it was gone, and she tickled Helen's perfect chin. Is this the face that will launch 1,000 ships? Is a dream a lie if it don't come true? Or is it something worse? Is a dream a lie if it don't come true? Or could it be a curse? that brought her down to the river that night. Leda by the river.